music, how things work. But they all feel very comfortable telling us how images work. You know what I'm saying? And so we are the fucking experts. We tell them. They can come to us and ask, it's like, I have this idea. And sometimes they have like incredible insights. Yes, most of the time they're wrong. They're dead wrong. And a lot of those upworthy things, they totally lack nuance. You know, they talk about some shit, some real shit. But in their rush towards social justice, they like completely miss the actual mechanism of how images and objects work. You know, so is it condescending? Some people need to be condescending.
Yeah, so I don't want to get too broad or kind of out there right now, but I have three parts to this. So, of course, I'm going to try to combine all what you guys are saying. So you, of course, have the idea of information, the idea of these tools you have towards viewing the world, and this kind of abundance and kind of gluttony of the camera as something that captures all this information. And, of course, you're talking about writers and painters and photographers and people who read and view and listen and all these things. So I think at that part, I think we go into the point of, as photography as a medium of, you know, you're capturing these moments and these kind of narratives and these stories and these visuals. Do you think, if I can get this straight, so basically, if you think with photography being this gluttony of information, this huge thing, that a reader who reads a writer who, you know, writes these stories, that it's all conceptual, they write it down, they make a decision to write certain words that are expressed and then understood differently from any perspective. A painter uses their tools to paint an image they see with the skill level of being able to articulate that. Whereas a photographer, I would think, is someone who's able to see things and use their skill to kind of specify or focus or kind of capture a moment within this gluttony of information, this huge abundance of things. Whereas a painter adds, a writer constructs, a photographer pinpoints and brings into focus a particular thing. Do you think, applying it to yours, for example, I don't want to be too broad because that's kind of difficult because every photographer is different. So do you think with your perspective, like you'll continue to find that as a strength of photography, that photography itself is individually unique in the sense that it's able to continue to capture and to continue to like proliferate the idea that an artist who is a photographer isn't weak or made fun of for being a photographer, or better than a writer, or better than a painter, or weaker than any of those, but will be stronger over time, not because of technology making it irrelevant, but stronger in the sense that it will always be something that is able to capture an individual point, or moment, or feeling, or consciousness, or anything.
I mean, yeah, I think that is a strength of photography for sure, and it has been since the beginning, but like I don't necessarily see that that's all that photography does is pinpoint something.
Not at all.
So, like, I feel like, unlike Sebastian, I don't really feel like I steal things for the most part. A lot of my photography is very much constructed. So, I think that photography can do all of the things that you said that, like, painting and writing can do.
You also have the point that, I mean, it's just one of those things that's, like, it's a very strength-oriented thing. It's an achievement for me. I see that in photography, whereas other things, it's more inclined to be easy towards creating, whereas photography is more difficult. And I think in yours you also have this extra layer of depth where you have this information being brought in that you're filtering out and pinpointing and allowing, and it's a skill to be able to like selectively find things that aren't too proliferated, and like you're narrowing down to like these objects and these certain things in these specific moments, and then you're adding this layer on top, which is you already have this information being brought in by the camera that you can't control in the real broad sense. It's just something that is absorbed through the lens that it's going to be there, and if you decide to remove it from the picture, that's up to you. But then you're adding this specific object on top of that. And I think that's another another level up towards photography, where you're taking this information and it's being selective. And then, kind of like a painter or a writer, or adding a word or a brushstroke, you're adding this extra level that's information on top of information that is even more specific. And I think, you think that's a strength in developing photography as a step forward?
I think you have a slightly, I mean, I'm taking issue because I think that it seems flawed from the very beginning, that you're beginning with that photography is about finding something. I mean, even when Sebastian's talking about taking, and we can talk about the language about that, but the notion about sort of finding something is is a really like archaic and false from the very beginning notion within photography. About every image from the very first photograph of Nips pointing his camera outside of his window to catch the street below him was considered and constructed. So it has always been, the image has always been a constructed image. Every image is always constructed. So just in the act of holding it up and framing something within your viewfinder, there's a creative act within it. So it is less constructive than any other medium.
Yeah, let me reword that though. I wasn't trying to say it wasn't constructive. I was trying to say in the sense of, you take a photo of someone, it's all intended. You put that person there. You decided to do that. It's all a will with photography as it is painting or anything else. I don't think there's anything less than writing or making music or making paintings or sculpting. It's all different means of a tool to make a visual representation of your thoughts and what you've designed to put into that. And I think, I was just wondering if there's going to continue to be that strength, like with photography, even in the abundance of mediums.
I think the problem is that photography is still misunderstood as a term, because you're talking about a lot of pinpointing and capturing a photograph. Photography, you can make, it's image making, and you can include a camera-based photograph, since that's the beginnings of photography. It didn't start with a camera, so you did not capture a moment where you created, and it's what Vinod says, you are composing an image, and that created a moment or created a meaning. So it's not confined to pinpointing, as you say, and taking the image, because you are creating it, whether it is with a camera, whether it's collaging it, whether it's there's so many ways to image making, to creating photographs besides just using your camera to do that. So I think it's the issue, or the roots is to really start understanding what photography is.
That's interesting that you say that, because I think that's the trick. Because I think there's borders. There's like barriers. There's a point where you get into Romare Bearden, and it's a collage, and there's a point where you're doing similar things, but you haven't crossed over the border, and it's a photograph.
Who cares?
Yeah.
No. It matters.
No, I mean, I don't mean that flippantly. I mean, seriously, who cares? Like, if the thing is compelling, the thing is compelling. If the book is good,
if
the
the
book
thing is compelling, I agree. As an audience member, I don't care. But as somebody whose life it is to think about how these things are produced, yeah, I do care.
And I was feeling. People really think this thing, like this whole thing, like.
I think that there are some that do.
Like serious people, do they really have this sense that photography is some kind of like ghettoized medium?
Yes. It is. Okay. Real easy.
That's just crazy.
Real easy.
That's just crazy.
Michael Bryce, come on. You go to the MFA right now. That has like a freaking incredible collection. It's a great place for photographers. Be like, you got this shit for real? I can look at it? Thank you. But what are the photographs? The photographs are on the one landing. Well, if you're in a wheelchair, you have no access to it. Where are the photographs? Photographs are in the freaking parking lot.
Of every museum, go to the bottom floor, they're there. They're down there.
Where are the photographs? Okay? Neil's got an incredible collection of photographs. If it wasn't for like PhotoFest, like, it's PhotoFest, you should bust something out. It's like, fine, bunch of them up here somewhere. It is in a ghetto, it is the lowest.
No, it is
not.
No,
okay, you're right. Performance art is the cool kid. Let's not trip now. Performance art is the cool kid. Performance art is the cool kid that a lot of us think is full of shit. But just in case it's not, like, this nigga's so fucking hot. Photography is no.
You're also talking about like the MFA and the history of art, the history of sculpture, the history of photography.
is.
I'm just saying. It's a
No, but
slice
actually,
of-
I'd like to add to that, just because I see in my own crazy head, there's two distinctions with photography. I don't want to talk about the art side right now, let's forget about the art side. Just in terms of the general public that you were talking about. And with Emily's comment of the pure democratic nature of the media, right? I think there's a cultural self-hate involved in photography, and by that I mean when someone who is not indoctrinated into arts thinks about the arts, it's something outside of themselves. It's something they cannot do. So then all of a sudden when they are thinking about photography and it's, oh, I'm able to do this, they don't make the leap of the education, the skill sets, all that. It's ghettoized in that sense of the familiarity, self-hate thing. It can be important because I too am able to do this.
It's not exclusive.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
the
no,
same
it's
thing
exactly
with
that.
Jackson
You're exactly
Pollock.
right. It's
Yeah,
that saying
yeah.
my 4-year-old can do it.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing, well, like I've got a camera. And in fact, it becomes easier to do that because, you know, you may not be able to go out, you don't have the skill to stretch a wall-sized canvas, but you've got the money to go down to Best Buy and buy a really nice DSLR, and you think that makes you...
I think there's more to it than just everyone can do it thing. I really do think it's about who's in charge and who has the cultural cachet of representing ourselves as human beings. At one time, painting was the thing that represented us as human beings. If you weren't looking in a mirror or a little shard of, you know, some reflective pot, and you wanted to see yourself, you had to look at a painting, and poor people couldn't see that. And painting had this cachet, this control over representing us as human beings, right? And I really do think that, like you said, with photography, which is a democratic medium, everybody can do it. I don't think it's a sense, oh, everybody can do it. I think it's this real resentment over the fact that suddenly, you know, nobody is really in control of how we represent ourselves anymore with photography. Go ahead.
I think it's really interesting. I just wanted to make an observation first that the word "should" has been like uttered so much in this discussion, and make of that whatever you will. But it seems like
What should we be saying?
we should be talking about art, which is the most interesting thing in this room. Sorry, and thank you, Emily, for sharing it with us.
Yeah.
That's what we should be doing. And insofar as labels go, I think it's a lot more interesting. Rather than like choosing whether or not to call something a certain thing, I think it's more interesting to me to think about what's gained or lost by applying a different label, or even in the case of like knowing about the biography. I mean, to me, it doesn't really add anything. I'm more with Sebastian on that. I want to look at the text independently of anything outside of that text as much as I can. I mean, a series is fun because you get to, you know, look at objects in relation to each other.
You want to look at the text.
What's that?
Did you say the text?
Yeah, I'm referring to
The
each of
images?
these as a text, yeah. Individually. And the show would be another text. Anyway, yeah, mostly I just wanted to make the observation that the word should has been thrown out there.
There's lots of things that people should do.
I mean, I want to say,
I got a list.
Harvey, you know, when Jonathan approached me about this, and he talked about this notion of like, that he wanted this to be part of the discussion about the notion of like artists, contemporary artists and photographers. Like my gut reaction to that is like, fuck that shit. Like, why is this, yes, I want to say, why is this?
There are
even a
things that are
conversation?
gained. I mean, you know, there's like grant funding or something like that. Like you call something a certain thing, like, you know,
I guess.
there's,
I mean, I don't know.
but you're also limiting the discussion.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything gained by doing that. But I mean, that's also showing. I think I've tried, because I'm not an image maker, right? I never really was. Even if I was trained to be one. I don't have those attachments. I personally don't feel the weight of that self-hate so much, even though I work within photography. And I think that's part of, I don't have the attachment to the object. I think that puts me outside of it. But yeah, I think that there is some stuff that we should I think that there are some moot points. I mean, I'm frustrated by the fact that question even comes up because it's not an issue. It's not an issue for Emily about whether she's a photographer. She's an artist that uses a camera, and I think that's the art that I'm most interested in. I don't really give a shit about anything about how it's made, whether it's made with a paintbrush, and whether that paintbrush is a sable brush or a house painting roller. I don't give a shit about that sort of stuff. I want to be moved by the image and the quality of the image.
Right, it's about the
in and of
compelling
itself,
nature.
right? And I hope that we get beyond this discussion within all media. You know, the one media that we didn't talk about here, which I do want to say is fucking sculptors. We haven't talked about them at all. So
There's a reason.
we talked a lot about painters.
I don't know. I'm entirely with you guys with like how compelling something is just by itself. But one of the ways you apprehend like the compellingness of it is, you know, how did the person deal with the medium or the material? And even not necessarily in a sort of like highly analytical sense or just like deeply historical one, but that shit does matter. No?
It does matter, but I don't think you need to know anything about how she made that image on the far wall for it to be a compelling image. I don't even think you need to know that she
That's
placed...
more interesting to me than the biographical information, personally.
Is how it was made?
Yeah.
How it's made.
I mean, well, the materials and the process.
Oh, that's so boring.
That is the depth of boringness. What I mean is like, sorry. I mean, it is. I mean,
so far, like what you lose going back to the biographical thing, like if you know it's that a work is about somebody like the loss of a loved one, like it makes it a little bit more difficult to talk about. I'm not saying that's the case in this show because I mean
about meaning.
But
what
it
does
is
it mean to
important
you?
though because painting can do things that photography can't do. Photographs can do things that paintings can't do. They all have their strengths, you know? And so to ignore those categories is to deny them their strengths, to me.
And you actually haven't touched upon the topic of conversation. What was it called?
The content.
Photography as content.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
That was the closest, was just this last,
Yeah.
like 1 minute, and that's enough for me though.
Okay. All right. If there's not any other questions.
I have one last question from Michael. What in a photograph makes you think that it's terrible?
I'm not going to answer it. None of these photographs are terrible. Put it that way.
Thank you all for coming and talking with us and listening. I really appreciate it.